Bengals here proudly. And I know some of you were probably depressed at the Super Bowl last week, and you're just sitting there going, well, some of you are smart enough to pick the right team. But not me. I picked the wrong team, right? I picked the Broncos. And I'm sitting there watching the game going, well, this is nothing new. I mean, if everything can go wrong to one team, that's what I do every Sunday for the last 20 years as I watch the Bengals. They were just called the Broncos instead of the Bengals. It was a different experience, but it wasn't the least bit depressing. I hope you didn't lose any money going with the odds makers. 2.5-point favorite. Now the Broncos. Yeah, whatever. Kids, thanks for walking out. That was great. I mean, my self-esteem was crashed, and then came back and restored it, and I feel good about it. For those of you that are visitors, there's a couple of things you need to know. One thing is I have this repeated line that I say almost all the time. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, and I hope you do, I'm not going to say that today. I don't even have mine with me on purpose. But you'll see why in a minute. Second thing you need to know, if you haven't been with us for a while, is I am a person that is easily drawn into obsession, and I've been drawn into an obsession for the last 6 months. It's the concept of this. God does not ask us to change the world. He simply asks us to change our world, and I am obsessed. Every time the news comes on, every time I'm watching the Olympics, every time I'm watching sports, when I'm with my students in my classroom, when I'm hanging out with these folks, I am just constantly amazed at the fact that none of us have the capacity to change the world. But all of us have the capacity to change our little part of the world. So I've been obsessed with it, and I decided, inspired by my friend Dr. D, walking the AT, he's going to try to change his world by walking 2,200 miles to raise money for a scholarship fund for Dayton Christian. And I'm just so excited about his world-changing act that I'm collecting 2,200 world-changing acts this year. Ones that I see, ones that I'm the object of, and ones that I can push out. Just little things where people change the world. I want to give you an update. I picked up 4 this week. That's a good week, and I'm hoping that other people will start adding to my list. Here was a world-changing act. People don't have to think about me when they're on vacation, but Ron and Judy did. And in Florida, they picked up 2 things. A box of oranges that can only be grown in Plant City. And I'm telling you something, you better have a whole roll of paper towels when you open one of these oranges, because they are so juicy. And I consumed several of those. I have several more to go. And then 2 quarts of strawberries. I shared a few with some of my friends and consumed the rest all by myself. There's something about a Florida strawberry in Ohio February. Because there's this thing that we don't get when I go to Kroger and buy strawberries in the middle of winter. It's called red all the way through. And oh my goodness, and they're gone. And they were delicious. Thank you. That was a world-changing act. They didn't need to think of me, and they did. Then we got another snowstorm this week, and I was shoveling my driveway again, and a different guy stopped as I had 10 feet to go. His name's Richard. And we had a great conversation. He goes, mind if I finish this for you? Do I mind if you finish shoveling my driveway with your snowplow? Go for it. And he did. And so I have a new friend. I'm going to write him a note this week and send it in the mail. Then I got the nicest letter yesterday from my son-in-law. We saw Ellen's husband, Chuck. We were with them last weekend. And he sent us the nicest letter, thanking us for who our daughter was. And it's like, that changed my day. I mean, I was having a good day. It made it a great day yesterday. That act of writing a letter changed my world. And then, I don't remember which day, because I didn't go to school enough this past week, but one of the days, I noticed that one of my coworkers was kind of stumbling toward his classroom first period, and I looked at him and I said, Joey, you need a cup of coffee, don't you? He goes, desperately. So I went to my coffee maker in my room, and I ground some beans, and I made him a fresh cup of coffee and took to him, and he told me later, he goes, you saved my day. With a cup of coffee, your day is easily saved. 4 new world-changing acts, none of them huge. All of them change someone's world, just for a moment. Let me pray, and then I'm going to read from a different Bible today. It's this book I have with me. God, thank you for loving us and for not asking us to do something we cannot do. None of us will ever change the world, but thank goodness you didn't ask us to do that. Help us to become really committed to and obsessed with the concept of changing our world, just impacting the handful of people around us, consciously, deliberately, and intentionally. And may your kingdom be increased because we reach out in world-changing acts for the people that we know. Speak to us now. Speak to us through Corey Lynch, this amazing guy in the NFL, and let his testimony really inspire us to action. I pray in your name, amen. All right, so I'm into this world-changing obsession. So every time I'm reading my Bible, I'm reading just about people from a long time ago in the Bible, and I'm looking at them from the perspective of, what can I learn from them? These are world changers. What can I learn from this world changer? What advice is he giving? And I got to confess something. The Apostle Paul, he wrote like half the New Testament. He has this amazing story. You flip over, you get to Peter. That dude walked on water. I mean, come on. I'm never going to be a Saint Peter. I'm never going to be anything that somebody says, let's add the word saint to the first name of him, you know. That's not going to happen. So I'm finding, though I love the advice, the example that I get from these people in the Bible, I'm a little overwhelmed by how great they are. So Ron and Judy sent me this book when they were in Florida. I should add that to my list of world-changing acts, right? They sent me this book, and they said, you've got to look at this book. And this book is called Playing with Purpose. It's about believers in the NFL, Christ followers in the NFL, and how Christ in their life is changing who they are. And Ron, when he called me from Florida, he goes, you're a Bengals fan. Do you know Corey Lynch? And I went, no, I don't think I do. But then I read the chapter. Okay, so back when the Bengals were, well, I was going to say back when the Bengals were really awful, but the Bengals aren't really awful. It's a team of mediocre people. They just kind of tolerate that. Hey, we got to a playoff game. Yeah, but you didn't win one. That's okay. We got there. That's not good enough. But a few years ago, the Bengals were especially bad. It was that series where they had several seasons in a row of losing seasons. And yet, in 2007, they held the #1 spot in one NFL statistic. You know what it was? Season 2007? More off-season felony arrests than any other NFL team. I didn't make that up. That is true data. In fact, it was so true that there was a joke floating around the Cincinnati radio stations, and this was the joke. There are 4 Bengal players inside a car. Who's driving? The sheriff. So it came time for the 2008 draft. And the coaches were really talking about, we need some positive influence in our locker room because we have people like Chris Henry. I don't know if you remember Chris Henry, who was a pothead and ended up dying a very tragic death. Really sad story. So much talent just thrown away through some really rotten choices. And then you have Chad Johnson. Chad Ochocinco, who changed his name to match the number on his jersey. Enough said there. And then a whole locker room full of guys like that. And the coaches started thinking about who can we draft that would be a good football influence but might be a positive character influence. Enter Corey Lynch. I'd like to tell you his story this morning. Corey Lynch was this incredible guy who grew up in Florida, and he was one of 4 boys, and he had a dad and mom who loved Jesus, and his dad's name is Brian. And when I read Corey Lynch's story, I went, that is a modern version of a world changer. And here's his story. Look, world changer #1. Corey Lynch is a guy who learns by example. And here he's growing up in this home with Brian, and I forget his mom's name, but I want to focus on Brian the dad. Brian the dad is doing what a lot of dads do, trying to raise 4 boys and wanted to keep them in Christian education, and that's an expensive thing. A Christian school experience costs about $7,500 a year per kid. This is a huge financial investment. And so Brian Lynch was trying to keep his kids in Christian schools. He's a full-time firefighter, and he's a part-time concrete contractor. And he's working 2 jobs to keep his kids in school. And he admitted, look, I was kind of struggling to live out my Christian faith, but I wanted to pass on my Christian values to my kids, but I'm working all the time. And somewhere along the line when Corey, the oldest son, was in elementary school, Brian said, I've got to live my faith in front of my kids. I could tell it to you, but I'd rather read it to you. Let me read just a little bit of what he said. Brian says, it was around this time Corey was in elementary school that I decided to get real about my faith. I was always a busy young father with all these boys, but sometimes you take God's grace too lightly, and that's what I was like. I was that lukewarm Christian that the Bible talks about, the kind that Jesus will spew out of his mouth. I needed to make a transformation in my life, and he did. Brian, Corey's dad, made this huge transformation. He said, look, if I'm going to call myself a Christ follower, I'm going to live it out. And he started getting up early in the morning and going to the kitchen table and opening his Bible and reading the Bible every day and praying. And guess who would get out of bed and notice his dad sitting there at the dining room table or the kitchen table reading his Bible? Oldest son, Corey Lynch. And that made an impression on Corey. Why? Because one of the things I'm finding about world changers is world changers learn by example. They don't just wake up and go, oh, look at all my wisdom. I can change my world. They tend to learn by example because they've been surrounded by people like Brian Lynch. And Corey did learn from his dad. He was such a great example. World changers also have this trait I'm finding out. They figure out that life has to be lived by principles. You know, those of you guys that are in junior high and high school, here's one of the things, one of the best pieces of advice that we as adults can give to you is decide what you're going to do before you're in the heat of the moment. Think about the principle that will drive your behavior before you're having to make a decision. Because then you'll default to the principle. It's kind of like an athlete. If I get the ball, what do? Well, if you have an open look to the hoop, you shoot the ball. If you don't, you pass the ball. You decided that ahead of time. You're living by principle, so that when the ball comes, you know what to do. Corey Lynch lived his life by principle. And the principles were instilled in him by his dad. His dad had a couple of rules that were pretty tough rules. I mean, he's going to live out the faith before his kids. And one of the things he does is he says, look, I reminded the boys that if they were told to clean up their rooms before playing a board games, that's what they had to do. But if they played the game before cleaning up their messy rooms, I would just fold up the game and take it away. There were no second chances. That's a principle. No second chances. You know that ahead of time. Brian had a policy for his kids that was a tough rule that the kids hated. Lynch kids were never allowed to spend the night at somebody else's house. You know why? You can control the culture of your own home. You can't control the culture of somebody else's home, even a good family. You don't know what's going on there. And the Lynch kids hated it. But Dad stuck to it because it was a principle that he felt strongly about. Now that Corey has children of his own, he said, I will raise my kids the same way. World-changing people live by principles. They make up their mind before, and then they just live out the principle. Here's another trait of a world changer that's great that I learned from Corey. World changers are teachable. So Corey's at this Christian school. It's down in Florida, and it's a pretty small school. Total population, 185 people, and he is this amazing football player. And he says to his dad as he gets into high school, I want to go to another school. I want to go to a big school. I want to get a look from a real college. And his dad says, no. We're going to let this one play out. And his dad ended up volunteering to be the varsity football coach for his Christian school. Well, the reality is, in private schools with small budgets, if you have a pulse and you say you're willing, you usually get the job. And so Brian got the job. Though he was qualified to be this football coach, he got the job. He becomes the coach of his son's football team, and he was a good coach. Again, pushing the kids on principle and discipline and no second chances. And he was the kind of coach, he describes himself as, I would get in their grill and turn the volume up to 10. So 8 inches from the player's face is where he liked to be, and he was talking at 10. And he wasn't cussing at the kids, because he didn't do that. But he did demand correct behavior. And he'd say, look, you have two choices here. Either you do the job I tell you to do, or you sit on the bench. Those are your two choices. That was great. Except it didn't work with Corey. He started shutting down in the criticism of his coach father. And he went to his dad at dinner one night, and he said, that just doesn't work for me. You can't just criticize everything I do when I'm doing so many good things. And Brian realized something about this. He said, you know what? I realized that making people do better is kind of like a bank account. You can't always be taking the withdrawal. You have to put things in. You have to make deposits. You have to encourage and encourage and encourage and encourage, and then take the withdrawal of a criticism. I don't know how it was with you guys when you were in education college, but here's what they told me as a teacher. They said, before you ever criticize a student, you better compliment them 20 times. Parents, grandparents, that's a magic formula. 20 times of compliment before you ever criticize or correct. Usually I think we do it the other way. 20 criticisms, and every once in a while we compliment. See, world changers change, and world changers are teachable, and Brian changed his coaching strategy with his son. Okay, let me fast forward a little bit into Brian's story. So he gets ready to graduate from high school. He's getting looked at by some colleges, but nothing huge, nothing huge. I mean, the big schools, he's going to this little Christian school. These big schools aren't really looking at him. But there was one that he really wanted to go to that had talked to him. Princeton University was looking at a college scholarship offer, and he's going, wow, to get an education for free at Princeton. Problem was he didn't quite have the ACT score, the SAT scores. So he was rescheduling another take of the SAT. In the meantime, college signing day came. And he didn't have the SAT scores back yet. And he had just played in one of those premier games where all the scouts kind of check players out, and he played in this premier game, and he was real aggressive on this one defensive play. He went in for an interception, had the ball in his hands, and the stronger offensive player grabbed the ball from him and ran and scored a touchdown. Oh, bummer. So after the game, Corey's dad, Brian, is standing there consoling Corey about, that was a good aggressive move. You probably overplayed it, but it was a good aggressive move. And as they're standing there talking, a coach from, you've probably never heard of this school, Appalachian State University, walked up and said, hey, I don't suppose you would consider coming to Appalachian State on a scholarship. And Corey Lynch said, where? Never heard of that college. What is it? And he said, Appalachian State. Where is it? Boone, North Carolina. Well, they went and they did their college visit. And Appalachian State extended a scholarship offer. Here's another world-changing trait. World changers walk through open doors. If there is an opportunity and it's extended to you, world changers tend to walk through that open door instead of waiting for Princeton or another door to open. And he walked through that open door. Now, some of you are smart and you're good football fans. You're going, wait a minute. Appalachian State. See, the big schools in the world, Ohio State, Michigan State, schools like that, they love to start their season with these little sacrificial lamb little schools. So in 2009, Sacrificial Lamb Appalachian State gets to play at the Big House. They're going to play Michigan in the opening game. It's really good for the little schools. They get a cut of the gate, and it's a huge donation to the school's athletic fund. And it's great for the players. They're going to get slaughtered, but they're going to get to play at Michigan in front of 109,218 fans. And so it was the opening game of the season, 2009, Michigan versus Appalachian State. And wouldn't you know it? At halftime, Appalachian State is winning. It's like, well, that's not going to last. Everybody knew it wasn't going to last because Michigan has such a deep bench. They go into the third quarter. Appalachian State is hanging on to a victory. Then it's the fourth quarter. And of course, this is so typical of Michigan. This is why we hate Michigan. Right at the end, they lose the whole game. But they're going to win it in the last minute. Sure enough, they score a touchdown, attempt a two-point conversion. They fail at that. They go for the onside kick. They get the onside kick. Now they're within field goal range, and they're down by 2. All they have to do is chip shot it in. It's down, it's kicked, and Corey Lynch from Appalachian State blocks the kick. Do you remember this? YouTube this afternoon. He blocks the kick, grabs the ball, and takes off running. And it gets down to about the 5-yard line and gets tackled there. But he secured the victory for Appalachian State over Michigan. That's a world change, man. He didn't didn't change all of football. He just handed Michigan what may be the biggest college loss in the history of college football. I mean, that's great. That's Corey Lynch. So now you fast forward to he graduates from college. And as he's graduating from college, the pro scouts start to look at him. All right, not too many, because he went to Appalachian State. But the Cincinnati Bengals find out about him. They go, who is this guy? Look at his numbers. Look at his stats. And they ended up drafting him as a fourth-round draft pick, and he ends up playing in the NFL. He's still playing in the NFL. Bounces around a lot, but he played for the Bengals, and he played for 2 or 3 other teams, and that's Corey Lynch. Oh, I forgot a couple of details about his life. This little world changer. When he was at Appalachian State in Boone, North Carolina, there was an unofficial team mom. Her name is Jane Graham. And she just loves Appalachian State. I mean, it's a college town. She loves Appalachian State. So she kind of, invites the kids over to her house. They have a nice-sized house. And the team kind of hangs out at her house. And Jane Graham noticed in Corey's second year, his sophomore year, that he was in a sling with a broken elbow. And she said, Corey, can I ask you a question? As a college kid with a broken arm, how do you do your laundry? He goes, one-armed. And she goes, you start bringing your laundry over to my house. She just took a liking to this Corey Lynch kid. So he starts spending a lot of time at Jane Graham's house. Well, Jane Graham has a husband and several kids. And they know Jane Graham's husband's name. Does the name Franklin Graham mean anything to any of you? He's the son of Billy Graham. He's the one that does the Operation Christmas, the shoebox thing that goes Operations, what's that called? Samaritan's Purse. Goes all over the world with these little shoeboxes of Christmas. Yeah, that's Franklin Graham, Jane Graham's husband. And they happen to have a young lady daughter named Sissy, who isn't Sissy Graham anymore. She's Sissy Lynch now. She and Corey got married in their last year of college. This kid's a world changer. But there's one other detail I didn't tell you about his story that I think is pretty compelling. World changers live their life ready to act. So Corey and Sissy were driving from the Bengals training camp down in northern Kentucky after a practice one day, and they noticed that a van in front of them was cut off by a driver, and really cut off. And the van veered off the side of the road and tumbled 6 or 7 times down a 300-foot embankment and ended up on its roof. And Corey immediately pulled over. And he's dressed in flip-flops and shorts. He goes running to the site of the crash, and the van's upside down, and 2 children get out, bloody, cut up, but okay. They get out, and they're screaming, help our grandma and grandpa. Corey runs up to the van, unbuckles grandpa, and gets him out. He's injured, but he's okay. But he looks over in the passenger seat, and here's this grandma hanging upside down, not moving. And Corey said, he's a fireman's kid. He knows what this world is like. He says, I knew she was dead. And I was going to have to help get a dead body out of this van. But then he noticed her fingers twitching. And it kicked in what he had learned from his dad. And he went over to this lady and realized her windpipe was crushed because of the seatbelt. And so he unbuckled her and got her out and saved her life. I watched an interview with Corey Lynch. You can get all of this stuff if you Google Corey Lynch car rescue. Okay, so the Cincinnati Bengals, Chris Henry, Ocho Cinco, all this trouble in the locker room makes them the target of an HBO show called, what's it called, Hard Knocks? It's like, okay, all the losers in the NFL, we're going to follow them around the locker room. And HBO came to the locker room, and they are filming the Bengals. They're looking for dirt. They're looking for, one more felony arrest. And in walks this grandma after she was okay, after she healed. And she was there that day with the cameras rolling, and she's there that day to thank Corey Lynch for saving her life. And with the cameras of HBO running, Corey Lynch is able to say, you know what? God gave me the ability to save your life. He put me in the right place at the right time. It's God that allowed me to do this. And on HBO's show, changer gets to tell his testimony about what the Lord Jesus has done in his life. See, world changers do things like this. They're teachable. They find out yelling doesn't work, they stop yelling. And they learn by example. They're not looking, for a book to read. They're looking for a person to imitate. And world changers are ready when the moment happens because they base their life on principle and they live by principle. They've decided ahead of time how they're going to respond in an action. And then when the door opens, they walk through the open door. I feel like this is an opportunity I could do. And they walk through that open door because they are ready to act. You put all those together and you get a guy that loves Jesus, talented athlete, able to save a life, and he changes people's lives. Does Corey Lynch drive around the highway looking for car wrecks so he can save everybody in the world? No. We're not asked to change the whole world. We're just asked to change our world. And Corey Lynch is faithful in doing it. You should borrow this book from Ron and Gina. I'm going to give it back to them today. You should borrow this book or buy it yourself and read about these players. They're just normal people. They're just like you and me. They're a lot bigger than you and me, but they're just like you and me. And they're changing the world for the Lord Jesus. I invite you to join the revolution of 2014 and help me collect 2,200 different world-changing acts. Nothing huge, just a lot of little stuff. It'll mess up your kitchen, it'll drain your gas tank, it'll make your pens go dry because you'll be writing letters. But you will change people's lives if you sign on to the revolution. May God add his blessing to the reading and explanation, not of his word, but of the story of a modern-day world changer.